Welcome to First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, the birthplace of Congregational humanism. We carry on that tradition of free thought today, dedicated to promoting a free search for truth, meaning, and justice. Our web address is firstunitarian.org. I'm David Breeden, Senior Minister. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone. I'm the Reverend Jim Fody. I'm one of the assistant ministers here, and welcome to the Sunday Assembly of the First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis for January 30th, 2022. Whether this is one of your first visits or you've been with us for decades, we are glad to have you as part of our gathered community. Today, as you watch Assembly, we encourage you to connect and comment in the chat, and we invite you to our Zoom coffee hour, which will be held immediately after Assembly. Watch for the link in the chat or find it in the Friday update email. Reverend David will be our special guest at today's coffee hour, so you can ask questions and learn more about his talk. Coffee hour will also have breakout rooms for current events and general conversation. Although today's assembly is online only because of the pandemic, there is still plenty going on in our FUS community. As always, the Friday email offers up-to-date listings of events, happenings, and ways to connect. And new this week, be sure to check out our completely rebuilt and redesigned website with a clean, updated look and easy navigation. Huge thanks to the team of volunteers who donated hundreds of hours of time to this project. You can see their beautiful work at our longtime same address, www.firstunitarian.org. Our assembly theme for January has been Living with Intention. And today we begin with a short quote from the 20th century theologian Thomas Merton, whose birthday is tomorrow. In a book published a few years before his death in 1968, Merton wrote this: "You do not need to know precisely what is happening or exactly where it is all going. What you need is to recognize the possibilities and challenges offered by the present moment, and to embrace them with courage, faith, and hope. Come, let us gather in community." Each week when we gather, we light our chalice, which is a symbol of our Unitarian Universalist heritage. And today we light the chalice remembering the First Unitarian Society aspiration to support one another's journey toward meaning and connection in the here and now. Thank you, David. We'll now recite our congregational covenant. Love is the spirit of this place, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
I'm Marcy Lissler, and I'm here to recruit you to recruit other recruits. The Nominations Committee is a dedicated group of FUS members who are searching this wonderful congregation for capable, interested candidates who are willing to serve on two crucial boards of FUS. When recruiting for the Board of Trustees, we talk to people who might have the skills, interests, and intense involvement to take on the 3-year term and deep discussions about direction and philosophy of our humanist congregation. When recruiting for the FUS Foundation Board, we canvass the congregation for committed, responsible people excited about ensuring the long-term financial strength of this institution through our foundation. It's rewarding to identify members who may not have yet considered themselves for these important board roles. Recognizing and matching members' skills with our needs is a process of monthly conversations about the incredible people who populate our community. Serving on the nominations team is a great place to take the pulse and promote the general health of our society by lifting up great candidates who can further our mission. Please consider joining the nominations team to help recruit candidates.
In 1881, the founders of First Unitarian Society stated their purpose: to form an association where people, without regard to theological differences, may unite for mutual helpfulness in intellectual, moral, and religious culture and humane work. Thanks to the generosity and time, talent, and treasure of our members and friends, we continue that mission today, promoting a free search for truth, meaning, and justice in a congregational humanist community that is democratically governed and self-supporting. Help support our unique mission by giving today at our website, through PayPal, or the Give Plus app. Thank you.
I'm Bob Adderhold, president of the Foundation of First Unitarian Society. As we announced in December, the Foundation made its 2021 Kurt Pearson Social Concerns Fund grants totaling approximately $9,000 to 6 nonprofit organizations. This week, I want to share with you a message from Brooke Bailey, Executive Director of Just the Pill, one of the grant recipients. Brooke is going to say a few words about the work our Pearson grant is funding. Over the next few weeks, you'll be hearing from other grant recipients. Before I turn it over to Brooke, I want to mention that the Kurt Pearson Fund's mission is to support the nonprofit organizations doing the social justice work in our community that Kurt cared so deeply about. The fund was created by Mibs and Perry Pearson to honor the life and memory of their son, Kurt, who died of AIDS at age 29. Since inception 31 years ago, the fund has grown to approximately $100,000, and it has distributed about $50,000 in grants. Here's Brooke to tell you more.
I want to say a special thank you to the First Unitarian Society for the honor of receiving the Pearson Grant this year. As founder of Just the Pill Abortion Delivered, we provide critical access to abortion care in rural communities throughout Minnesota, Montana, and Wyoming. We have mobile clinics being built out now, and later this year, we will go to the Texas border to make sure the Texans have access to abortion care. We know that this year will bring many challenges, but we're up for it. We're ready to do what we can to counter the bans that we expect to be passed across this country, and especially in our neighboring states in the Midwest. I was raised in the United Church of Christ, and I feel very strongly that my faith guides my work. When patients would come into the abortion clinic crying from the damage that the protesters did, I would sit with them and I would talk to them about their faith. And they would often ask me if having an abortion meant that they were a bad person or that God would hate them or punish them. And I always expressed the values that I learned in the UCC, which is that God is love, God is with us at every moment of our lives, and God only wants what's best for us. So I want to thank you for the community you're creating and for being the counter to all the negativity, all the shame, all the hatefulness that protesters will spew, claiming to be Christians. Thank you so much. I'm so proud to be in partnership with you and so proud of the work that you are doing.
Of the value of a moment of stillness. And we do this so that no one among us is alone, either in celebrating joy or in facing the burdens of life. This morning we have a joy from FUS member Steve Hansen. As many of you may recall, Steve received a diagnosis of esophageal cancer in September. He had major surgery around Thanksgiving and has had chemo and radiation treatments. This past week brought fantastic news. Steve not only had his feeding tube removed, but also was declared cancer-free by his oncologist. Steve and family are thrilled with these developments, and we share in their joy, and they are grateful to all their FUS friends for the support of these past many months. We now take a moment of silence to reflect on all that is going on in our lives and in the world, from the serious and heartbreaking challenges to the inspiring stories of our fellow humans who are living lives of justice, service, gratitude, and compassion. Let us now share a moment of silence.
Thank you so much, Dale. And you've got to come back when people are in the room so they can experience your presence in here. So great, thank you. The reading this morning is from Michelle Goldberg, The Mental Health Toll of Trump-Era Politics. It's the New York Times, January 21st, 2022. According to a recent USA Today Suffolk University poll, almost 9 in 10 registered voters believe there's a mental health crisis in the United States. A fifth or more reported losing sleep, being fatigued, or suffering depression because of politics. As many as a quarter of respondents reported self-destructive or compulsive behaviors, including, quote, saying and writing things they later regret, making bad decisions, and ignoring other priorities, end quote. As the political scientist Yana Krupnoff and John Barry Ryan wrote in the New York Times, most Americans, upward of 80 to 85%, don't follow politics. Kevin B. Smith, the chair of the political science department at the University of Nebraska, doesn't dispute this, but he speculates that even those who aren't intensely interested in politics are still affected by the ambient climate of hatred, chaos, and dysfunction. Quote, "What I think is going on is that politics is unavoidable," he said. "It is essentially a permanent part of the background noise of our lives," end quote. Of course, the last thing a political scientist, or for that matter, a liberal columnist, would tell you is that you should totally tune that noise out. It is depressing to live in a dying empire whose sclerotic political institutions have largely ceased to function. This is a collective problem without individual solutions. There's an awful dilemma here. Any way out of the gloom of our current political situation will almost certainly involve more politics, end quote. Well, the mathematician and philosopher Blaise Pascal wrote, quote, "All of humanity's problems stem from our inability to sit quietly in a room alone," end quote. Pascal was onto something, I think. A recent study at the University of Virginia found that a quarter of women and 2/3 of men chose to subject themselves to an electric shock rather than doing nothing and spending time alone with their thoughts. Now, reflect on that. You don't have to admit it out loud, but what would you do in that study? Spend an hour alone with your thoughts, or take a quick electric shock and get back to your phone? A quarter of the women and 2/3 of the men chose the electrical shock. How comfortable are you with your interior life, what most Americans call their spiritual life? Does a little deep breathing and mindfulness sound enticing, or are those inner voices growing louder and more distracting? After all, we are now at 22 months of pandemic-related stress. The Mayo Clinic lists as pandemic stressors, quote, altered routines, financial pressures, social isolation, and concerns with personal health, end quote. We can all add a few more to that list of stressors. Parents have kids at home. Kids have parents in care facilities. Many of us are delaying our dental and health care. The list of loved ones and friends with COVID grows longer. We all know that if someone gets very ill, the chances are the local hospital will be overwhelmed. And then there's that odd relationship that many of us have with time. Time is speeding up and slowing down at the same time and really confusing things. Fact is, most of us just don't do very well cooped up and isolated. It's a human trait. How affected are you by that ambient climate of hatred, chaos, and dysfunction, as New York Times columnist Michelle Goldberg calls it? Studies indicate that in addition to the other COVID stressors, most Americans are concerned about the state of our democracy. Our theme this month is intentionality, and today I want to consider ways we may intentionally calm those worrying inner voices while at the same time staying ready to stand for justice. The reading this morning from op-ed columnist Michelle Goldberg is a bit apocalyptic, I think, but very representative of op-eds these days from both the right and the left. Describing the U.S. as, quote, a dying empire whose sclerotic political institutions have largely ceased to function, end quote, is perhaps a bit of an overstatement. Yet there's no doubt that U.S. global influence is in decline, and the pandemic has exposed in sharp relief the deep political and class divides that have always existed in American society, but are often ignorable by many of us. For example, just a bit over a third of Americans have some sort of college degree. That's the highest percentage ever, and at one time a college degree was a ticket into the middle class. Nowadays, however, for many, a college degree means a path into underemployment and crippling debt, and that's the lucky third. Political doomsaying is indeed the ambient noise we hear just now. And I've said this before, democracy is an easy word to say. It sounds nice, but what is it? Too often we latch onto abstractions and even believe desperately in those abstractions without reflecting all that much on what they mean. So let's think about that for a few moments. As with so many words in our English language, tyrant is a Greek word. In ancient Greece, the term was used to describe leaders who took power in some way that was not democratic. Tyrants were leaders usually born into the elite, wealthy class. The word took on its current meaning in 404 before the Common Era, when ancient Sparta defeated Athens and imposed a constitution that was favorable to Sparta. Spartans chose 30 wealthy Athenians as puppet rulers backed up by the Spartan army. These became known to history as the 30 tyrants. The 30 tyrants instituted a reign of terror that ultimately got so bad that even the middle classes moved out of the city, leaving only wealthy Spartan collaborators behind. Eventually, so many people had been run out of the city, they were able to form an army, and they retook the city. When Eurocentric people pontificate about democracy, we do well to take what they, meaning most of us, say with a grain of salt. The ancient Greek attempts at a form of government called democracy did not go well. Demos in Greek meant common people. What the Greeks discovered is that rule by the common people has at least two very difficult challenges. One, democracy is terribly inefficient and is arguably unworkable when the country is facing a crisis. And two, rule by the majority often takes away the rights of the minority. It was, for example, a legal democratic vote that condemned the philosopher Socrates to execution, though, parenthetically, Socrates despised democracy. The Greeks never found a way out of these conundrums except through the periodic rule of tyrants. Now think a moment about our government buildings out there here in the U.S. How many of them are faux Greek or faux Roman architecture? They allude to a democratic past that did not occur. In addition to the buildings, the founders of the U.S. are often depicted as Romans in togas, alluding to the supposed democracy of pre-imperial Rome. The Romans did, for a time, practice representative democracy. That's where we got it from, but as in the case of Greece, that experiment failed. Walking around Rome today, you still see public works with the letters SPQR on them, the Senate and people of Rome. But who were the people? We still use the terms patrician and plebeian roughly as the same way that they used them all those years ago, and it tells us something about how their government worked. The divisions between the rich and poor were absolute. Law even forbade patricians and plebeians from marrying each other. We also do well to remember that something between a quarter and nearly half of the people in ancient Rome and Greece were enslaved. They had no rights whatsoever. Women of whatever class didn't fare that much better. When we talk about democracies and republics, these were the models in the minds of many of the founders of the United States. Ancient Greece and ancient Rome sounded good to them because the Europe of the 1770s was a whole lot worse. As I've mentioned before, the only positive models for government were the practices of Native Americans, but the founders of the U.S. couldn't admit that they were emulating them. Here in the U.S., after the Revolution, a sharp divide very quickly became apparent between those who wished to perpetuate the rule of the professional elite and those who wished to see a broader citizenship, still limited to white men, however. So back to my question, what is it we mean by that abstraction, democracy? Take a quick peek at where so-called democracy has flourished. First, to consider the successful democracies we can name usually have small geographic areas and small populations. Think of Switzerland, think of Costa Rica. The larger ones follow a pattern. Athens during the Athenian Empire period, Rome during the early expansion of that empire, France just before Napoleon, Great Britain during the late Victorian era, the U.S. for a few decades after the Second World War. There is a discernible pattern here. Territorial expansion, abundant natural resources, military dominance, trade dominance, a well-educated professional elite that does the ruling despite the pretenses of democracy. And the empires all rose and fell, and the world didn't end. So, is there a big fix? How do we get out of this ambient noise we're living in? I'm one of those who wants to know the details of what I'm up against, so I'll summarize my assessment. One, democracy as a form of government has never been adequately defined or successfully created in larger nations. We have to face the fact. That doesn't mean it can't be. It only means it hasn't been up to now. But I'm a humanist. I believe that human beings can solve human problems. Second, the presidency of Donald Trump and now the travails of the pandemic have starkly revealed that something on the order of half of Americans don't believe in democracy. They believe in freedom, but that's not the same thing. Democracy, even in the form of a representative republic such as that set up by our U.S. Constitution, requires sacrifice and communal action. Freedom to, as the saying goes, and freedom from, that's not the same thing. That Americans have these two very different notions of what the American project is all about will continue to create stalemate and strife. For some Americans, that government is best which governs least. Yes, it was our very own Thoreau who said that government is best which governs least. For others of us, that government is best when it protects the rights of all of its citizens and contributes to human flourishing. These are incompatible positions. But I'm a humanist. I believe that human beings can solve human problems. A middle position from both sides agrees that some things need to be regulated. What does and does not need regulation is the bone of contention. But it's a start toward compromise. Even utterly incompatible visions do not mean that the two very different visions cannot exist in the same nation. It's a big place. Coexistence, however, requires compromise by both sides. Our challenge and our duty is to speak clearly and loudly what our vision is and why we think our vision is best for everyone. Our challenge and our duty is to state clearly what is not open to compromise. Our challenge and our duty is also a commitment to compromise on those things where we can compromise, because there's no big fix. It's only a commitment to small fixes. We can set our intention on staying mentally and physically healthy even in these days of ambient political noise. The Mayo Clinic offers some advice: limit exposure to news media, make connections, do something for others, focus on positive thoughts, use your moral compass or spiritual life for support, they say. And that's good advice, no doubt. And notice that besides that limited exposure to the news media thing, all of this advice are what congregations are all about: making connections, doing something for others, focusing on positive thoughts, using your moral compass or spiritual life for support. Because yes, even though personally I'm a cynic, and you all know that, I also believe in accentuating the positive, as that World War II era song went. Accentuate the positive. For example, looking to Europe for some projected long-term effects on the global pandemic offers some positive insights. The European Central Bank posits that the pandemic has created a permanent change in remote work and accelerated the digitalization of workplaces, projected to raise productivity levels as it reduces carbon footprints and as it increases time spent with family and with leisure time. The ECB also predicts that the pandemic has made businesses more resilient and more efficient as employers have reimagined ways of meeting consumer needs. Additionally, supply chains have become more resilient, more diversified, and more local, making for jobs and reducing the carbon footprint. Okay, does any of that make you feel a little bit better, I hope? Accentuating the positive. As you already know, there's no big fix to any of this, but there are a lot of little fixes that do add up. Let's start by proving Blaise Pascal wrong. Let's try to learn to sit quietly and intentionally with our thoughts. And listen to Mayo Clinic. Limit that exposure to news media. Make connections. Do something for others. Focus on positive thoughts and use that moral compass. Much is changing, and yeah, change is scary. The human condition is that we all enter this movie that we call life when, well, it's in the middle, isn't it? And the human condition is also that we're all going to be leaving it before the end of the movie. That's what life is about. But the core mission, vision, and values of us, First Unitarian Society, will continue to encourage and facilitate that advice from the Mayo Clinic, because we are a congregational humanist community that takes care of each other and that takes our message of justice and hope to the world. We're humanists, after all, and we believe that human beings can fix human problems. So may it be. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. All of these we carry in our hearts and in our minds until we are together again. Our closing words are by Maya Angelou from her poem Continue, one of my favorites. She writes, "My wish for you is that you continue to be who and how you are, to astonish a mean world with your acts of kindness. Continue to dare to love deeply and risk everything for the good thing. Continue to float happily in the sea of infinite substance which set aside riches for you before you even had a name. Continue. So may it be."
you.